Sharon Stanford, 12th Street and the Grapes of Wrath. The summer of 1967 was one of the best summers of my life. It was the year that I turned 16. In my fevered teenage mind, the parties, the picnics, having my first job, and an extended summer vacation because of one of Detroit's perpetual teacher strikes made it a season to remember. Even having to go to summer school so that I could take fewer classes my senior year did not interfere with my fun. I was blissfully unaware of the pervasive racism and resentment that was simmering in my city. We lived in a middle-class East Side neighborhood. There were Germans, Poles, Jews, and other ethnic groups in our neighborhood and in the schools my sisters and I attended. Most, if not all, of the stores and businesses in our area were owned by white people. In fact, the only aberration was a small grocery store around the corner from our house that we referred to as the colored store because it was owned by a Negro. We didn't shop there very often, but it had the best penny candy. I distinctly remember that hot July Sunday when the riot broke out. I was returning from the East Town Theater on Harper and Van Dyke with my friends Linda and Antoinette. We had gone there to see the latest Beach Party or Elvis movie. I don't remember which. The most important part of going to the movies on Sunday afternoon was to see who was there, with who, and who was making out with whom. Dressed in our Sunday best, minus hats and gloves, we were walking down Van Dyke and could smell smoke. Lots of smoke. There was an unnatural feeling in the air. Then we noticed people, mostly young men, leaving out of the stores on Van Dyke, which were closed on Sundays in those days. The Cunningham's drugstore and the record store carrying handfuls of merchandise. In those days, television sets were too big and heavy to carry. The biggest object you could carry was a transistor radio. We heard people mumbling about a race riot and the police shooting Negroes. Somewhat alarmed, but still unaware of what was going on, we headed down Medbury. I lived off Medbury on Iroquois, and Linda and Antoinette lived on the next street, Seneca. As I turned onto Iroquois, I could see my grandfather standing out in the middle of the sidewalk looking anxiously up and down the street. Upon seeing me, he motioned for me to hurry up and get in the house and told Linda and Antoinette to go straight home. Still confused, I went up on the porch of our house. My grandmother was sitting on the porch, looking anxious also. "It's another riot," she murmured. "I don't believe this is happening again." Of course, I didn't know that she was referring to 1943. It was only after watching the television and reading the newspaper that I found out there had been a race riot in Detroit in 1943. The next few days were unreal. We learned that police had raided a Blind Pig, an illegal after-hours club on 12th Street. Someone started shooting and bricks were thrown at police cars, and suddenly Detroit was on the national news. Buildings were burning and people were looting. On TV, we saw tanks rolling down the streets of Detroit. A National Guard had been sent to our city. We were not allowed to leave our street. At the most, we could sit on the porch and chat with our neighbors. At night, we didn't turn on any lights in the house for fear of, as my grandfather said, someone chucking a rock through the window. We played checkers and movie stars, a game my sister had made up, or read in the semi-darkness of the street lights on Iroquois. One evening, bored with the tedium, I turned on the TV. For whatever reason, everyone had gone to bed except me. The movie, The Grapes of Wrath, was on. I became enthralled in the story of the Job family and their struggle during the Depression. What impressed me the most was that I didn't know that white people could be poor and struggling. I had seen a few struggling Negro families, not realizing that our family was one. I didn't know that white people could be so poor and broken down. I also wondered why these folks didn't get on welfare, as my grandmother called it. I didn't know what the welfare was at the time, but I knew that the lady down the street with all the kids was on it. Sometimes she even came down and borrowed $5 or $10 from my grandmother while she waited for her next check. Abruptly, My grandfather came downstairs in his pajamas and ordered me to turn off the TV. "Somebody'll chuck a rock in the window if they see a light on," he admonished me. I could have protested, but being an obedient child, I did as I was told. It really bothered me that I didn't find out if the Jodes found jobs or got on the welfare. After the riot, life changed. The grocer on the corner, the drugstore, the cleaners, all closed. I never saw white people clear out of a city so fast. Slowly but surely, the white people on our street began to move to something called the suburbs. Our practically all-white police department in the city began to change also. More Negroes were recruited to the force. No more would an all-white force be allowed to persecute the Negro citizens of the city. Many things changed in the next few years. The next year, Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert Kennedy were assassinated. President Lyndon B. Johnson introduced his Great Society that revealed the ugly underbelly of poverty in America. On television, we saw poor white people like the ones in The Grapes of Wrath. James Brown implored Negroes to be black and proud. Suddenly, everyone was sprouting huge afros and dashikis and talking about Mother Africa. Protests against the Vietnam War and apartheid in South Africa were happening everywhere. It was a wonderful, terrible time in America, and I took it all in. By the way, it was years before I finally saw the end of The Grapes of Wrath. It didn't end like I thought it would. The Joad family were still struggling, and Tom Joad was on the run from the law. Kind of like life, I guess. Sometimes there is a happy ending, but most of the time, we just continue to struggle and survive. But we do indeed survive.